Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host, Jordox, and this episode is the season review for 2025. Now, there's so much to get through. I had to bring in a guest, someone that's helped me out throughout the year, someone that shares a microphone with me over on the AFL Fanatics podcast. Absolute legend. We've got Jordy DeCina. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Jordox. Thanks for having me on. As you said, love fantasy, classic as well, obviously, during the year, but also keepers. And been a couple keepers, so keen to dissect the season.
Absolutely. So just tell us a little bit, because for anyone who does follow on the Fanatics, they know that you had a very successful season in Classic, finished in the top 200, was it in the end?
Yeah, 193 in the end.
193. So that's in AFL Fantasy Classic. Incredible effort. How'd your keeper year go? Any luck in any of your squads there?
Yeah, not as good as a Classic. I'm in two keepers that I really focus on. So one has been going for about 6 years. It's a 10-team league. I finished 7th in that one. So a little bit down the bottom. I sort of got a trophy a couple of years ago. So I'm sort of in the rebuild phase. So I got a couple of good kids in that one. And then another league I'm in was a startup keeper this year. And it's actually got a couple of coaches panel guys in there, Mini Monk and MJ. So I'm in a startup there with them. And I came 5th in that one. Again, I sort of drafted young. So, yeah, keen to see how they go over the next couple of years, really.
Awesome. 2 is a good amount. You can really keep track of both squads really well. I think any more than that gets a little bit tricky. So great to have you on, and great to do this bonus episode, which really is just to review the season, I guess, but also the best thing about keeper leagues, well, one of the great things about playing in a keeper league is all the people playing in Classic or single season draft. Last weekend was the week before last was grand final week. It's done. They are Dunsky. Whereas for us fanatics who play keeper leagues, I mean, one part of the season's done, but the next part's just about to begin. There is so much that is to happen between now and the start of next season. And, we'll look at that a bit later in the episode, the specific things that are going to happen. But it's just exciting. It was good to have a break and have a breather last weekend, but excited to talk to you, Jordy, today about the season that was and then some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we approach the summer. So on the episode this week, we will start with our club-by-club reviews. Jordy and I have taken 9 teams each and come up with a couple of things. 1, our most improved player, and 2, one to watch, someone to keep an eye on heading into 2026. After that, we'll have a bit of a chat, not a huge chat, but we'll just look at some things that you need to consider for your sides that are about to happen. So obviously we've got the finals. The premiership will be run and won, hopefully going the Crows' way. But then we've got the AFL trade period, the AFL draft, the new dual position players will be announced, those changes. And then for us and you with your squads, you've got the listings and then start preparing for next year's redraft. So there's a lot to sort of talk about there. And then we'll go into the Finders Keepers Player of the Year award. I'll announce that. And then we've got a question that's come through from the listeners. And then we'll wrap it up. So, Jordy, we're going to start club by club. I'll go first because I had to start with my Crows.
Sounds good.
With Adelaide, I thought the most improved player, and this is strictly in a keeper league sense, but my most improved player at Adelaide was someone I love greatly, Riley Thilthorpe. I've had him in my home league since he was drafted, and watching him break out this year has just been so enjoyable and what we love about keeper leagues. So he went from an average of 68 to 83. He scored 80 plus in more than half of his games. And, I think everyone in the AFL world has taken notice of him but in the fantasy world, to see him put up an 80-plus average, I think he's only just scratching the surface of what he can do. So I'm very excited for the future with him. One to watch, I put down Josh Rochelle. He averaged 63 from his 13 games, and he's entering his 5th season next year. Now, he had a pretty significant injury in the back half of this year, and I think with Adelaide, there's been a lot of talk and from a fantasy sense, focus on Rankin, Isaac Rankin's year and how he went into the midfield and what he is now. I think some have just forgotten the pedigree that Rochelle has. And I think entering his 5th season next year, we're going to start to see not necessarily him go into the midfield, but his scoring to start to climb and be more of a Toby Green type in terms of his scoring output. At least I hope so anyway.
Yeah.
Geordie, any thoughts
Definitely.
on those two and then take us through Brisbane?
Yeah, Phil Thorpe, it's a sort of, even the year before, he started putting up some scores at the end of the season. He came off that injury and, obviously that year he, put some size on. So, it's sort of a bit of hindsight. It's like, oh, he was out, but maybe it's helped him. And I agree with you. I think, 83 is just sort of touching the surface. And the great thing about him is he goes into the ruck a bit as well. So there's always a couple of extra hit outs. That might lead to an extra tackle in a contest. And that just helps that boost that average up. So, and Rochelle as well. He's shown that he can score. Like the first game he kicked 5 goals. Like, if he can start getting on the end of that, he's shown he can score. So, I think they're good shouts.
How'd you go with Brisbane?
So Brisbane. So actually, the most improved that I thought was Jasper Fletcher. I actually had him in both of those keepers I was talking about, but he went from an average of 60 to 83, and he also gained defender status. So he was a winger in his last year, but we saw him move to defence, and so he's gone from a wing role to defence, and that's pushed him up to an 83. I sort of watched a bit of the footy shows during the year, and a lot of people were very impressed by him, and they think he could potentially be a captain. And he did have a big 141 ceiling score in round 23 against Freo, I think it was. So it shows that, on his day, he can score. He's starting to put it together. We have seen Zorko, who is also back there, sign a 1-year deal recently. So I just think that he's sort of found that position now. And I think once Zorko goes, I think he actually might be the main distributor. And I think when that happens, he can go 95 plus, I think, in the years to come. Sort of like Zorko. There is obviously Kitty Coleman around there in his return, but I actually think Fletcher and Coleman can work together. And I think it's not going to affect the scoring too much, I don't think, as long as once Zorko sort of moves on.
Yeah, and then you've got Darcy Wilmot, who had a really big finish to the year. His second half of the year, he looked unreal. And then just in the news the last couple of days about Jordan Ridley apparently wanting to get to Brisbane. Now, there's a fair bit to go under the bridge there to get that done. But, there's going to be a bunch of them. But I agree. I think Fletcher was the one that was the most that they liked. My fear is that he's so good that they might use him on that wing, which does, you could look at Jason Burgoyne over at Port as an example. He moved up to a wing, lost that defender status, and then, he's a bit of an awkward player now. But, Fletcher, what a season. And you could almost argue just about the most improved for the whole comp, let alone Brisbane. Who have you got your eyes on in the off-season? One to watch.
Yeah, so Sam Marshall, he was an academy player, and he sort of came in at the end of the year, but he put up 2 scores of 74 and 94. And this is from a kid, he's probably played, half a dozen games. But the way he looked, I just really liked it. And he sort of seemed to roam up a bit. And I don't know, he just had a little bit of Nick Martin, I thought, come in. And obviously scored really well. And I just think he could be a good stash or a rookie option if you play rookies. Obviously, Brisbane's side is pretty stacked, and I think they're getting some more academy kids coming through, so that would be the only concern. But I think if he's a rookie or a stash, I think he could potentially go on a wing and maybe get some scores there. So just want to watch.
And you can even just watch him in finals. If he holds his spot in September, we'll get a good look at him there as well. But yeah, he's someone he was a name, wasn't he? Just a name that thought, when he plays, watch this guy. And yeah, those scores at the end certainly lend itself to him being a player. So one to keep an eye on. Over to Carlton, most improved player. I've got Lockie Cowan. He only averaged 63 for the season, but you've got to look beyond the average. I think he got injured and then he lost his spot, but he returned to the side in round 17, played all 8 games at an average of 80. So he's averaged 80 in that second half of the year. He's still only 20 years old. And I don't know, I feel like Carlton play a lot of Thursday, Friday night games. I feel like I watched him a lot in that last 6 weeks, and he just looked awesome. So, yeah.
I like
definitely
it.
Definitely most improved, and someone I don't think would even be available. I think a lot of people would have jumped on him in that late stages. And I'm kicking myself. I actually traded him. I had him, and I've been so happy with him, but I traded him because I was heading towards a grand final, and I brought in Paddy Cripps, which was good. But, yeah, I know now that the season's one and done, and I didn't win the flag.
Long term.
Thank the granny. I wish I had Cowan still, that's for sure. Now, one to watch, Cooper Lord. He's a guy I talked about a lot on this podcast this year. Again, his average was only 60, but in the 10 games where his time on ground was over 70%, he averaged 75. And, he actually had an on-ball tagging role in those last few weeks before he got concussed. Now, he's likely to be a mid-only next year. He had forward status this year. I do think he loses that. And that's why he's just one to watch. I'm very keen to see his summer. I think there's going to be a fair bit of change at Carlton in the off-season, a bit of a shake-up, and I'm pretty confident he'll be right there in the mix for round 1.
Yep.
Over to Collingwood, mate. Who's the most improved for the Pies?
Yeah, so the Pies were a hard one to sort of go through. I think, obviously they're a contender and they've still got some of their old boys in there, like Pendlebury and Sidebottom having pretty solid years and consistent years. But the most improved that sort of came from nowhere, I thought, was Ned Long. He really came on this year. And, if you look at his average from 2024, it was 45. And this year, if you remove those early sub games, he averaged 81.5. And I just think he's only 22 years old, so he's actually younger than I thought, and he seems to be in the best 22 at the moment. Obviously, I think Sidebottom and Pendlebury have signed a 1-year deal, but yeah, he's got his age on his side, and I just think he could potentially be an 80 guy in the future for keepers. Had 4 tons as well during the year. I think he had a big ceiling 130. But I thought he was much improved. That's pretty much a 35, I think, improvement on average. And he would have been on the waivers probably.
Oh, yeah. No one would have drafted him except for, super deep leagues. He would have just been plucked once he jumped in the side. And, if you were really smart too, because he had some games early in the season where he was a sub, so his points per minute were high. If you jumped on him then. I think the interesting thing on Long is Tom Mitchell seems to be the biggest competitor for that spot, and I don't think many thought you could play both of them, and I was really amazed that in the not amazed, but just I thought for Collingwood pushing for top 4, they would go with the tried and true Tom Mitchell, but they went with Long in those last games. So see what they do in September, but I think that bodes well for his security. Who have you got on the watch list?
Yeah, so a real disappointing one, I thought. Dan Houston obviously went 3 times 90-plus average at Port consecutively. Came in with a 67 average this year. So it's a real interesting one. Obviously, Collingwood paid up a lot for him, and he was all Australian in the last couple of years, coming at as a sort of a real high, price tag. And in a keeper, like you would have thought he would be, in your best 12 or probably best 10. But he did have an early suspension, a couple of niggle injuries. I think he had an abdominal, so I don't know whether there's a little bit of that going on. Plus, obviously coming into a new side and a new system, and I think he played a couple of different roles. There was a bit of a wing role last couple of weeks, so it could either go two ways. It could be a bargain that you might want to try and trade. Some of these might even drop him for next year, or he might be one of those ones you're looking at chopping. And I guess you probably want to see something, maybe in the final series now or in pre-season, or he's a real tricky one to put. Like, if you can get back to 90, or is he one that you're happy to just put back into the waivers?
Yeah,
so one to watch.
He's one to watch, and it'd be a headache for owners because there's just no clear sort of reason for the drop off. It's a bit of role, it's a bit of system. Maybe there were niggles. We really don't know, and we won't know until probably round one next year, and we watch him go around. But definitely one to watch. It's a good call in the summer. If he's once the season's done, and if he goes in for surgery, we find out he was carrying this or whatever it is. That'll help coaches make their decision. For Essendon, I had most improved Jai Caldwell. Bit of a tricky one. He only played the 11 games, but I think you watched those 11 games, you could see he was a very much improved player, and especially fantasy scoring. So he went at 94 last year, which is pretty good, but bumped that up to 104 this year. And I think he's one of the surest bets you could have in a keeper side at the minute. The injuries are starting to pile up. For a young career, he has had a fair few, but if he's fit and on the park, he's their main man at centre bounces, and he's a scorer. So very good year from him. The one to watch I have is Andy McGrath, who has been a bit of probably a frustrating own for coaches in keeper leagues. I mean, a number one draft pick. I think he's comfortably averaged 80s for a long period, but it's probably that up and down scoring that makes him really hard to own and trust. But so this year he had his lowest average since 2019, but it was a late season role change that really caught my attention because pretty much every single Essendon player was injured. They had to shift the magnets, and they threw him into the midfield as a main centre bounce guy. And he averaged 96 in those last 5 games, and a bit quieter in the last one. But watching him, he was, I don't know, I just got the feeling maybe this is his new spot. So I'd be keeping an eye on him in the off-season. Very interested to see where that lands. What's your take on it, Geordie? Do you think at the age of 27, maybe, he can find a new role in the midfield?
Yeah, I think it's one to definitely watch. Like, obviously, he's going to have defender status, so if he can do that, he's going to be a really good pick for us. But I agree. Like, I think Essendon have sort of tried, they've tried Hobbs and Sardis and Perkins and these types, and we always thought that those were the next ones coming through. And there's sort of a bit of talk that maybe they'll get traded. So maybe they do need McGrath to go in there and fill a spot there next year while they're sort of figuring this mix out. So I wouldn't rule that out. And I think, Essendon, they've got quite a lot of defenders. And if they're all fit, then maybe there is a spot where he can move into the midfield. Like a Zach Reed had a great year, and he'll come back in defence, and obviously, different positions. But their defence is, there's Roberts back there. There's a few types back there where maybe they do need him in the midfield, and maybe he can be a tagging or a cooler role.
Who's the one that popped up at the end there? Clark as well.
Clark,
really good in that role. Redmond, Clark, Ridley if he stays. Yeah, they certainly have enough. So, and I think the other thing too, I think they want to start looking at merit in other roles. They had to pull him back this year because there was no one else. But don't be surprised to see him pick up defender or forward status in the next few years as well. What about Freo? Who's the most improved for them?
Yep. So I think with Freo, we saw a bit of a game change. So their midfielders were down a lot this year, but one of the most improved was Luke Jackson. So he went from 78 to 95 average, which is massive. That's almost 20 points. Had that ruck forward status, so it was pretty much a top 6 forward for us. And we really saw him starting to dominate the ruck and not just be a sort of stay-home forward. So that was really positive to see. And we saw him also taking just a lot of CBAs, just as a midfielder as well. He'd start as a ruck, and then he would also do CBAs next and then get a rest. So a different bit of role change. And, you know, there would have been a patch there in the middle of the year where he was the number 1 rated champion data player. And, you know, one of his games had one of the highest rating scores. So there's a lot of media that are, you know, said he should be the number 1 guy. So just be interesting to see moving forward. Like, obviously, Sean Darcy is still there, whether he gets a trade or whether they keep doing the tandem ruck. If he is solo, then I think he can definitely go 100 plus. But I think he'll be ruck only next year. But, you know, it's just good to see him putting up, you know, a 90 plus average now, because I think we've all seen he's capable of being a scorer. We just haven't really seen that yet. You know, he's been sort of floating in the 70s, or we wait till Darcy gets injured and then we play him. And then we sort of pick matchups, and now it's a consistency.
It's a trust thing, isn't it? You can just trust him now that he won't let you down. I think what we forget with Jackson too is how young he is. Now, I don't have it in front of me. I reckon he's only 22, 23 still. So in terms of if he does stay, you know, if Darcy left and Jackson's the number 1 ruck, I mean, he's a baby in ruck years. So, yeah, I think the sky's the limit for him. Now, your Wonder Watch is interesting. I'm keen to hear about this guy, because I don't know a lot about him, but you've got some interesting thoughts on him. Who is it?
Yeah, so one to watch was Cooper Simpson. So he played a new role, which was at halfback, and he scored 59 and 64, so not massive scores, but he should have defender status next year. And I think he could be a late flyer and a keeper that he could, you know, potentially average 65, 70. No one will really touch, and he could add a bit of depth. And I think he just offered a bit of speed and stuff for Fremantle. And I think there's a role there at halfback for him. So I think he's just, one to watch. Defender,
is he the one
should go late.
Is he the one that then got injured on a 0?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
So in
right.
Classic, everyone traded it. Everyone traded him in, and he unfortunately did that AC and was out for the year, but he was looking good.
Yeah. It's a perfect sort of suggestion, because it's someone that would not be at the front of many people's minds. And then, just keep an eye, because you'll see in the summer reports, everyone's training down the house, and everyone's looking good. It's good to remember the positions and the roles, because, if he's at half back, that's pretty appetising, isn't it?
Yeah.
For Geelong, most improved, you know, this one seems a bit boring, but really when you look at it, Bailey Smith had to be the most improved player probably in the league, because not only are we talking going from an average of 83 to 116, there's a whole 12 months he missed in the middle of those 2 seasons with an ACL. So to miss 12 months with an ACL, come back, join a new club, and then become the number 1 ranked fantasy player in the game on average. His last season, when he scored the 83 average, he was ranked 96th for average. And then 2025, he's ranked number 1. So I don't think we're going to find a bigger improver than that, albeit a fairly obvious one. One to watch is a guy I really like, Connor O'Sullivan. I think there was a game earlier in the year I watched the Cats, and I watched him and I thought, my God, look at this guy. He's unreal. But the scoring just wasn't there. But he only missed the 1 game this season, and this was his second year. He played 1 game in his debut year. And then, to miss only 1 game for the Cats, who have, finished top 4 again, says a fair bit about his job security, and I think he'll build on that 58 average. Someone I'd like to have, I reckon. Just got to have a bit of a look, see if that scoring's going to be there next year, or is it more down the track?
Yeah, and he marks a lot as well, and he's a good interceptor, and he uses the ball well. So I can definitely see him putting some scores up.
For sure. What about Gold Coast?
Yep. So this one, the most improved, sort of, I feel like it could be on the back of someone else, which we'll talk about in the one to watch. But the most improved, he's got a bit of a name, is Bailey Humphrey. Averaged 45 last year and went at 68.7. So a 23-point increase there as a forward. And I know we talked about trust before, but I sort of had a bit more trust with him. Obviously the forward line, there's only so many options there. So him at a F4, F5, I was happy to field this year. And the big thing I noticed was his CVAs were up. So over the year, he had 41% CVAs. So he'll hold that forward status next year. And I think Hardwick has shown that he likes him at that perfect mid-forward split. So, and obviously Gold Coast improving too. I think he can, get on the end of some goals as well. And I think we're only going to see improvement from here. So if he can do a 70 plus next year, I think that's going to be a fieldable forward. And to get mid-time as well is promising. That sort of goes on to the one to watch. And this potentially might affect Humphrey as well, because if this player leaves, Humphrey potentially could get more mid-time, or he can keep the role. But disappointing year was Sam Flanders. So he averaged 68 this year, and he had an average of 108 last year. So that is a 40-point drop or 50-point drop, which is absolutely massive. Obviously, last year he played a bit more halfback early on, which was just sort of junking up. But then, even doing a mid-forward split, to go at 68 with his caliber is just, it's just crazy, to be honest. And I know he missed a big chunk of the preseason. He had a back concern, and I don't know if he played round 0, I think, or round 1, I think, or maybe he played round 1.
Yeah,
but he wasn't going to get up for it. Yeah, but I don't think he was going to. If they did play that round 0, I don't think he was going to play. He was close to it. But we saw in the middle of the year he was out with a back concern, and then he was sub a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know whether he's fully over it or whether the preseason caught up with him. It looked like Hardwick didn't really want to feed him into the midfield. Maybe, that was and the back. So he's one that I think surely should bounce back from a 68. And there's a bit of trade talk now as well. I think the Saints are interested. I think maybe Carlton were interested. So it's going to be really interesting. But I think if I had him in a keeper, I wouldn't be trading him. And he'll have forward status next year. And I think he could be, I think he can bounce back, and he probably could be a top 6 forward next year for us.
Oh, yeah. He's got a sneaky F1 look about him. I said this the other week when he was named a sub in that game against Port Adelaide, in a game Gold Coast had to win. They lost, but then they got through. But they had to win if they wanted to be top 4, let alone finals. And he was the starting sub, and I just thought I'd be very surprised if he's at Gold Coast next year. I think he gets back to Victoria. Like you said, St Kilda, Carlton, someone will go and get him and play him in the midfield, and he'll have forward status. I think he's the most curious one on this whole list, but he's also the one I'd be the most optimistic about. With that forward status, like you said. Over to the Giants, most improved. And there's a guy that you brought in AF Classic this year, so we called him your boy all year. But Lockie Ash, his average went from 77 up to 100 in his 6th year.
Amazing.
And, he was just sort of thereabouts for a few years. I think we could all see the potential. And it's an interesting case of waiting. Like a 6th year breakout isn't that common, particularly for a role like that as a halfback. I thought it might take a Whitfield retirement or something like that for this to happen. But now the two of them did it together this year. Whitfield was big again, and Ash has averaged 100. He's a brilliant player. I wish I had my mitts on him in one of my leagues, but I don't. For the one to watch, I've got two names, but I'll talk about one. Harry Rouston. Now, his average this year was 52, but it goes up to 73 in games where he had over 50% time on ground. So when he's not the sub, he's averaging 73. I just think he's such a great prospect because he's been around for a couple of years. He's now had a look at it. They played him on the ball for a fair bit, when he got in, I think probably due to personnel issues. And he looked pretty good. Then they put him forward. He kicked 4 goals in the game. And then in the last game, I think because Cornelio went out with concussion, he went back into the midfield. I just think the Giants like this kid and he's going to be playing. He might not be a pure midfielder for a few years yet, but he'll be doing a bit of both. Might have forward status. He's just the perfect guy for me. So see how he goes. I also really like Joe Fonte, and his numbers weren't anything exciting, so I didn't jot down his average or what sort of scores he put up. This is a pure eye test guy that when I watch the Giants and I watch Fonte, I just think, wow, 4 or 5 years, he could be the next. Well, not even Whitfield. I mean, Whitfield's excellent, but there's so much to like about the dash that he has. Anyway, bookmark that name, Joe Fonte, for the next few years.
No, I like him too. I think they're great names there. And Ralston, like you said, he seemed to be a bit of tagging as well, and then he went forward and he kicked 4 goals in a game. So starting to find his way in different roles, which is a good sign.
And when I was looking at him, I think I had in my mind he was a first-year draftee, but no, he's been around a few years. He actually played a handful of games in 2023.
Yeah.
Didn't get up for any games last year, and then we saw him plenty this year. So he's that perfect sort of age, ready to break out.
Yep.
What have you got for the Hawks?
Yeah, so it was interesting having a look at the Hawks today. They aren't really that fantasy relevant. So their highest guy was Meek. He averaged 93. So these are the team that's in the finals, and they're not really fantasy relevant. But a couple guys that improved on their average. Josh Ward went from 59 to 75 this year. And, a bit more of a prominent role in the midfield. Obviously, Will Day was out for a little bit of the period there. But he seemed to increase CBAs, and it looked like he was, it looked like Sam Mitchell gave him a bit more of a role in there. I know round 1, Warple got injured, and then Ward came in, and then I think Day ended up getting injured. So whether he's fully in there, but there is talks that Warple may be going. So if he does, then Ward averaging 75. Could he push that next year? It'll be interesting to see, but definitely started getting a lot more CBAs, which is a good sign. I think he's a third-year player. The other one was just Jack Gunston. Incredible year, over 60 goals. Went from a 59 to 74. So if you had him in a keeper as a forward, you could have played him as a F5 and picked the right week. Amazing year. Be interesting to see how he goes next year, if he can back it up.
Oh, surely not.
But yeah,
surely not.
Yeah.
Who knows?
One to watch. So, there's talks of Warple going to Geelong. So, again, it will be interesting to see what happens with Ward. But if he does go, there's probably a midfield spot there, whether it's a 5th or 6th rotation. There's a guy called Cam McKenzie who is getting a bit of talk about trade. But I just really like him, and I think if Warple goes, there's a spot there that he can slot in. I think Sam Mitchell definitely doesn't want to trade him, and he's a high draft pick, so I think it could be him or potentially Connor McDonald could get some more inside minutes. So, I mean, he's he's a name that I'm sure a lot of keeper teams already have as a forward and scoring over 70. But he could be pretty handy inside. We just sort of have to get that role change. But Yeah, just ones to watch there for the Hawks.
Yeah, the midfield mix is really interesting at Hawthorn. I think Warple leaves. I reckon there's a good chance Cam McKenzie takes an offer to go. I think, I imagine he'd be a touch frustrated not to have seen a little bit more in the back half of this year. I actually think Hawthorn, they might go on and win the flag, but I think they're missing a big mid, and I reckon that's what they'll spend the trade period doing, trying to get a big fish, whether it's a Christian Petrarca or a lesser name. It'll be a big one that takes up a spot. So I'm really really interested in what they do with Josh Ward. I think he had such a great year in terms of improvement, and I think he is their most improved, as you've put him there. But yeah, is it inside or is it wing? Is it inside or wing? And I think that's going to be something we find out next year, because they'll have Newcomb, they'll have Nash still, and they'll have a big
if
fish
Day can get fit. Yep.
Oh,
exactly.
Of course, Will Day. Yeah, he's a huge one too. For Melbourne, I put most improved Keziah Pickett. I don't think enough has been spoken about this guy's fantasy season. He made the All-Australian side, so good to see the real AFL world recognising him. But I didn't see much talked about this guy, who's been a promising guy for years, and I think we wondered if it was ever going to happen. But his average went up from 66 to 87, and it was on the back of becoming a bona fide midfielder this year. His wife found it odd that he was named forward pocket in the All-Australian side, because he just broke out as a midfielder. Anyway, we won't go into that. The thing I loved about him this year as a midfielder is he still hit the scoreboard. Now, there were 3 occasions, Geordie, where he was playing predominantly midfield and he kicked 5 goals in a game. Now, I'm sure in those games he went forward and kicked them playing forward. But if you've got a midfielder in your side, fantasy-wise, who can kick 5 goals in a game, you're feeling pretty excited every time he gets near it. And the other thing, I thought he was no chance of keeping forward status for next year. But the last 3-4 weeks of the season, he was a little bit more forward than mid. So he may end up keeping it for next year, which is, at 87 average, he's right up there with your top forwards.
I think he's an interesting one where he starts in the midfield and then, like you said, he rolls forward. So apparently that counts into the positions, which is interesting. So it'd be very interesting to see if he has that mid-forward status.
That would be huge. Special mention to Jake Bowie too. Another guy who for a few years we've been thinking, can he get there? He went up from a 63 average to 86. Maybe first half of the year better than the second half, but he looked pretty unreal cruising along that back line. So, Now, the one to watch, Caleb Windsor, his scoring went backwards in his second season. And, he wasn't. He may have even been a bit of a disappointment for those who saw, we liked what we saw in his first year. But he was tried as a centre bounce midfielder in their last 3 games of the season. Now, we talked about Hawthorn's midfield mix, but Melbourne's midfield mix is an interesting watch as well, because it was just so, just the same for most of the year. It was just the same. Yeah, just the same. They didn't mix it up. As a Trent Rivers owner, I was begging for them, put him in the midfield again, but they did late. But it was Caleb Windsor that they were trying in there. Petrarca was forward. Now, his scoring wasn't anything. He was just scoring 50s. But I'm just keen to watch him in the off-season, because I did not see him as a centre bounce guy. I saw him as a wing or a halfback flanker type, at least at this point. So very curious on why they did that and if it persists with, a new coach, which is yet to be announced.
He'll have that defender status, I think, and he's got speed, so why not try it? I think it's very interesting.
When he was drafted, when players are drafted, there's always like, oh, he's a bit like this, and they say an AFL player, and we all cling to that. But I just remember when he arrived, nearly 2 years ago, likening him to Errol Goulden, the way he plays, and I've always remembered it because of that. So we'll see. Now, North Melbourne were slight improvers in the real stuff. How'd they go in fantasy?
Yes, so it was actually quite difficult to find a most improved. Obviously, you had your Sheezels, killing it as usual, but he didn't actually go up crazy numbers, and we saw a few of their big guys go down. But a couple of solid guys for keepers, I think this year. Paul Curtis, he went from a 56 to 71, and become a really solid forward option, I think, for a lot of keeper teams out there. And Tom Powell as well went from 78 to 87. Probably started to make him in your keeper team maybe an M4 M5 range now instead of having him sort of at the back end there. And I think he's I think potentially one more year in the system he's starting to really put it together. So an 87 is great. And obviously Luke Parker's in there and he can't be in there forever. So for him to go, I think he's a 90 guy.
I found him interesting this year. His start to the year was very exciting, and then he tapered off. But it was more that last few weeks they weren't using him in the middle,
No.
and I don't know why, and what that means for him. But I hope they persevere with him because I think like you said, he's a 90 guy at least moving forward.
Yeah, so that's good to see because I think he's been a high draft pick, and a lot of teams have kept him. And I know a lot of other teams that own him in my leagues have been waiting for it. And he obviously had that forward status last year, so he's a bit more valuable. But to go to 87, I thought that was a pretty good improvement. The one to watch, and we sort of saw this at the back end of the year, but it might be pretty obvious, but Colby McKercher next year, I'm very excited to see him because I think we've sort of seen him in the back end of the year settle into that halfback role. I just think he should be a 90-plus average, and I think in Classic he was a big guy that everyone brought in, and you look at his average for the year and it comes out as 78, and it's just like, oh, wow, did McKercher average 78 for the year? And that was just on the back of a mix of different roles. Tried him out on the wing, on half forward. So that is the only real concern, really, is if they sort of go back to that. But I just think they need someone there at half back. And I think we saw at the end of the year, Sheezel sort of got doing that midfield forward role that I think Colby should hopefully get a full year at half back next year, I think. And he should go 90 and also 90 plus and also he's coming into his third year. I think we're going to see that. Yeah,
I agree. And I think it makes sense that that's where he sits for a few years and then down the track becomes a midfielder. It'll be interesting to see what they do with those spots because, they mix it up a lot. And I don't know if I'm biased because I own him in my home league, but whenever I watch them, I just think he looks unreal. I don't know. Maybe his disposal's not always there, but the 1-2s, the meters gained. I think that's his spot for sure. And Caleb Daniel, he copped it a lot in terms of criticism and that. I didn't think he was that bad, but I do wonder if they'll stick with him in that spot next year as well.
Yep.
Over to your boys, Port Adelaide. I probably should have given them to you, but I just was doing one for one. Tell me how I went. Most improved, yes. I put Joe Richards. So came across from Collingwood. This was his first season at Port Adelaide and just his second in the AFL. His average went from 51 up to 65, which isn't huge on the surface, but there was a 6-week run in the middle of the season where he averaged 83 in that time. And I remember, I'm sure many stood up, took notice of him. He just looked so good as that connecting half forward. I wondered if when Lukosius came back, would that impact? Maybe it did. But this is a guy in his second year. First at the club, I think he'll improve again in his third year. What did you make as a Port man? You would have been pretty happy with his debut.
Oh, definitely. Especially coming across from Collingwood, not knowing too much about him and to, play every game and, as you said, hit the scoreboard as well and that high pressure, high forward as well. Really, solidified his spot. And as you said, get on a bit of a run there of 83. Like, I don't know, I always see in keepers with forwards, if they can put a couple together, it just gives me confidence to put them straight on field, the next week. And he was one of those guys, won that run and say, yep, I'll just put him on field. So, he was great. Good pickup.
And then for the one to watch, I mean, it's just Miles Bergman's role. I just want to know what his role's going to be. I know where I think he should play, and I'll ask you in a minute, Geordie, but he had such an interesting year in terms of me even knowing much about him. At the start of the year, there was a group of players, Port Adelaide defenders, and they're all possibilities to pick up the points left behind by Dan Houston, who left for Collingwood. I liked Farrell. Ryan Burton was there. There was a whole bunch of names, and Miles Bergman was one of them. And I thought, I just don't know if he's a halfback distributor. He feels like he's a harder, bit more of a tougher player, contested player. And then we saw him in the midfield and was actually given a tagging role. And in the 7 games he played where he had over 35% centre-bounce attendances, he averaged 100. Now, that's a small sample size, but we would have seen more had Port not had so many injuries to their back six, particularly in that second half of the year. But that could be a blessing because I think he'll now keep his defender status. He'll be a defender mid for next year. Hopefully, for Port's sake, that back six is healthy and strong, and Bergman can play on the ball and offer a bit of protection, to Butters and Rosie if he's in there. I just remember that showdown. He tagged Dawson, and Dawson scored really well because he had 100 tackles. But I remember thinking, I haven't seen anyone blunt Dawson's impact in a game better than what Bergman did that night. Yep. What do you reckon, mate? Will there be a mid next year?
I really want him to. I think, there was a bit of contract talk in the year, and I think a big part of him signing for 2 years was that I feel like they guaranteed him a bit of midfield time. And I wonder if Carr's plan is to do that because he did sign, and I think there was an interview that I read and it was like, I'm really excited about more midfield time in the future. So I really think that's where we do want him. Again, like you said, he seems to be a guy that has to plug some roles, and it got really unlucky where like every week there in a row, one of our defenders went down and he had to just go back. And it was like, when are we going to see a full game? I mean, we did see that with Dawson and a couple of others, but he did have to go back and forth, or he did do a whole half in the midfield, and then the second half would be able to do a quarter here and then a quarter there. And I'd be interested to see, and that's probably going back to the intro of trade targets and just Port's defence, because I think if we can get a defender somewhere or pick someone up, free agency pool or something, or a delisted free agent. That will be one, but he'll be a big watch in the preseason. But I think he's going to play midfield because I think we signed him for that, and I'm pretty excited about that. So hopefully we can see that, because I think, as you said, defender. I think he had about 78 average, I think it was. So it's only going to improve on that next year.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what about the Tigers? This guy you've put down as most improved. Yeah. Probably a candidate for most improved for the comp as well, actually.
Yes. So a guy called Sam Banks. So average was 43 last year, but he came up to 79.5, which is massive. And he gained that defender status in the year. So I think he was maybe a winger. He definitely was mid-only. But he went back there. I think it was when Jaden Short did that calf and he was out. I think that's when we saw him move to that halfback role, and he basically stayed there for the rest of the year. He scored 5 tons, and he scored a big 121 to finish off the season. He's 22 years old. I think he found himself in that role, and if I had him on a keeper, I'd definitely be keeping him as a young player off halfback for the Tigers. I think, massively most improved for them.
I think the not concern, but the thing I wanted to see, because you're right, that's exactly when he blew up, was when Short was out. And if you remember, Short was out as late change or it was slight, and it ended up being 4 or 5 weeks or whatever it was. So for those 4 or 5 weeks, Banks was going going ham and looking awesome, I kept thinking, I want to see it with Short. I just want to see if the two can do it together. And look at that finish to the year, a 121. I mean, yeah, if you grabbed him off your waivers around the time Short went down, you absolutely laughing. One of the gets of the year.
Yeah. The other one that I really liked, defender as well, I really like Luke Trainer as a key defender. This is sort of similar to your O'Sullivan one at the Cats. I just think he's good ball use and good mark, and I think he can start to peel off a bit. I think Richmond have got a couple of keys. I think it's Tom Brown and they got Bolter there, and they've got another key as well. And I think he could be that sort of interceptor guy, sort of be like a Ridley or a Luke Ryan type that could potentially go 80 plus in the future. So I really liked him. I think he can peel off for marks, and he seems to be a pretty good sort of third tall player. We saw a couple of 80 plus scores. I think even in his first game, in Classic as well, he was a big guy at the start of the year. I think he put up a 90 in his second game in round 2, or maybe it was around gather round. But yeah, some big scores straight up, and I just really like him as one to watch.
Yeah, caught my attention, early days, and I think Richmond just experimented with him. Like he was the sub. Remember, everyone was staggered that they did that, and then
he went forward.
He was playing forward, and he was on a wing, and he was this and that. But I think I'm with you. I reckon long term he'll be that key defender, but the interceptor that peels off, like you said, and
like a Sicily type sort of thing.
Yeah. And his off season will be really interesting because they're so young, Richmond. So do they start to lock him into that spot, or do we see a bit more VFL time or time forward? Interesting. But down the track, I think he's going to be a ripper. For St Kilda, the most improved, again, nothing groundbreaking about this, but Nazai Wanganeen-Miller had a pretty good season. He went from a 98 average to a 111, and that was in his 4th season. So he put up a 98 in his 3rd season, which is brilliant. To go up to 111, and the thing that the knock on him, I guess I had, was he was a low ton guy, very consistent with 90s and low tons. But it wasn't until the second half of the year we started to see the 140s and the 150s and those ceiling scores. And we saw him as a midfielder as well. He had a lot of time on the ball, to the point where there would have been owners a little nervous he'd lose that defender status, but he won't, I'm sure. And just, the picture of consistency. He dropped under 90 just 4 times from his 23 games, and, deserves every penny of that contract he just got to stay at the Saints. The one to watch, though, is Max Hall. Everything about this guy screams fantasy jet. He was a mature age recruit, 22 when he was drafted 12 months ago, 22, 23. And his average was 66, which is pretty good. It was that second half of the year, though, where he was just everywhere. As that sort of half-forward connector type, spent a little bit of time in the middle. He averaged 81 in his last 9 games. And he's so interesting for me next year. He could either be one of the rare players that cracks an 80-plus average in his second season, or he could go back a little bit and tread water for a year or two. I tend to think he goes up to 80 next year because, he's not an 18, 19-year-old. He's been around, and, he looked pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think the Saints potentially might be doing some changes with their list, and you got the Zach Joneses and the McRae types, and just Max Hall just spend a bit more time in the midfield, and if he does as a forward, it's great.
The beauty is he doesn't even have to. Like, he could just have a little bit of a look at the middle, but his ability to connect up and down those flanks means he'll score anyway. What about Sydney? Most improved. Pretty familiar name there.
Yeah, so it was really hard for me to go past Brodie Grundy, I think. Incredible season. Went from 96 to 107, but this pretty much came from the bye. So if you look at his scores, it was sort of so-and-so. And then from the bye, he just went absolutely ham. I think it was 120 to 130 plus post the bye. And he sort of, we saw that at Collingwood. He had 2 seasons of 120. That was for a full season. And we thought he was past it. And I know in a lot of keepers, people were looking to trade him, or he was sort of, oh, who's going to be my next ruck? But to come out and go 107 average, it's really intriguing what he does next year. Like, can he sustain that for a year now, or was it just went out of the box? You think Sydney should improve next year. So, yeah, I mean, imagine he could be one of our top rucks next year. It's going to be really interesting to see. But, yeah, I think he was the most improved. Another honourable mention, Angus Sheldrick. I know he's one of your guys, Jordox. You liked him during the year. But yeah, he didn't play a game at all in 2024. I think he had a few injuries, but removed some of those sub games, and he averaged 75 this year. And he ended up signing a 2-year deal, I think. So I think Dean Cox has him a part of his system, because I think if we didn't see him in the side, he probably, I would have thought, requested a trade. I know he's a Perth boy, I think, maybe a West Coast, but he's chosen to sign and stay on. So I think that's a good sign moving forward. One to watch for Sydney, and this is another interesting one. Matt Roberts at the start of the year, he was flying. He was all in our classic sides. He was averaging 90 plus, but then halfway through the year, he found himself in the VFL. He missed quite a lot of games. Well, he wasn't in the side at the end of the year. He had a couple games as sub. I think there was talk of him. He went into a wing as well.
Yeah.
And it sort of seemed to see when Mills came back in about middle of the year, and Mills ended up being, a halfback distributor there. So it's really interesting to see what the goal is next year with Matt Roberts. Obviously a young player, a good keeper prospect, but I'm not sure where he fits in the side. He could definitely bounce back, or he could just potentially find himself on the outer. So not sure what's happening with him. So one to watch.
One of the surprising changes we saw in that second half of the year in the keeper space was Roberts not only moved to a wing, not only, getting sub games and playing in the VFL, but, just queries now on what does that mean for him going forward. I think the positive would be, I reckon Callum Mills, they're going to want to get into the midfield
next
agree. Year. And I think Blakey's form and Blakey's scoring hasn't been talked about as much. I think he's got 2 years of 80-plus averages now, and he's just so good in that role. Jake Lloyd did impact. He played sort of half forward for wing most of the year. So, don't know. Riley Bice was there as well as maybe a competitor for that spot. But I think you've nailed it. We're going to watch and see what happens with Roberts in the summer. And, I think he'll be all right. I don't know what happened this year, but, we'll wait and see.
We started the year on fire, so.
Yeah, and we finished last year on fire, started this year on fire. Not sure what it was. 2 more clubs. I'll go West Coast, most improved. Ryan Marrick, his average went up from a 41 to 75, thanks to a halfback role that, saw his average in the first half of the year really strong, which was so handy for those that jumped on him with that forward status. But then the second half of the year, a bit like Roberts, he was more on the wing some games, but then he was halfback again, more on the wing, halfback. And his scoring directly correlated with where he played. So in those games he was getting kick-ins, his scoring was all right. But when he was stuck on a wing, I don't know. I don't know enough about him and what they've got at halfback for West Coast to make a call on whether he finds himself there again next year. But certainly on the criteria of most improved, he absolutely was the one. The one to watch, though, Brady Hoff. Now, he averaged 64 in his 4th season, but we saw quite an interesting change. He was thrown onto the ball, I think maybe a third of the way through the year, and he spent a lot of time as a centre bounce guy. And his scoring was the same as it was in the back line, yo-yos, up and down, up and down. He'd put together a couple of 90s or 80s and you'd think, here we go. And then he'd just smack a 40 in your face. So I guess it all just comes down to when he's a lockdown defender or a defensive mid, he doesn't touch the pill. When he's that more loose defender attacking mid, he gets plenty of the ball. Now, that's quite obvious and simplistic, but it's just the case with this guy. So I think the thing to watch in the off-season is what do West Coast do with him? Because I've seen him play attacking and connect the chains and link the ball. And that game against the Crows where West Coast took it right up to him to the end, he really impressed me. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Geordie, finish us off with the doggies.
Yes, so I think the biggest one for the doggies was Matt Kennedy coming over from Carlton. Had that forward status. I don't know. I guess we didn't really think. I don't know. I didn't really have high expectations. I thought he'd be a good depth player, but to go from 74 to 96, play quite a good midfield role, and he actually ended up being, I think it was F3 in the end, and a really good forward option. And bar one of those weeks where he dropped a real low one, I think he was sick that week. He was pretty consistent all year. Big improvement. Another one in the midfield there was Ed Richards, who went from 84 to 97. So two big improvements there for their midfield. This sort of was on the back of McRae did get traded, and Treloar missed a massive chunk of the year. He only played 4 games. So and they never seemed to put Sanders in there or try anyone else there. I think, even Riley West maybe went a sprinkle in there. But it seemed to be Kennedy and Richards and Bond and Libbo were the main 4. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with Treloar. I know he hasn't got a contract at the moment, but he's killing it in the VFL. So, but Matt Kennedy to continue or to do that was amazing. I think he'll be mid-only next year. So sort of got the 1 year out of him if you were contending. But, if he's a 95 guy next year, that's still very handy in keepers. And one to watch, Joel Frazier. So he sort of came in as a defender and we saw him just do a bunch of different roles. But I've checked his classification and it looks like he's going to be a mid-forward next year, which is very cool. Average 71, so that's very fieldable at the moment. I just think, there's the whole talk of him being baby Bond, and he's a real nice impact player to watch. And I think over time he should get more mid-time. But if he's a mid-forward, you definitely want him in your side. So one to watch.
Yeah, they played him half-back. They played him on the ball. They played him forward. He's one of those ones that when they just lock him into a spot, he'll be able to build. And, he's got third-year breakout written all over him, I reckon.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's our club-by-club review for each side. And, hopefully you got a little bit out of that. Probably went longer than I anticipated, so we'll work on the rest of the show with a little bit more pace. But, no, that was good, Geordie. I think plenty of names in there that will be, people to keep an eye on. And if whether you're an owner in keepers or if there's someone that has them and you can get a trade done, or if they're available in your redraft, lots of track watching coming up for us as the keeper league fanatics that we are. So there's a few other things I want to touch on, Geordie. We'll roll through this quickly, but just like I said at the start, if you play a single season draft comp or you play in classic, this point of the year, it's all over Red Rover, and you can start thinking about other things. But for us, in keeper and dynasty leagues, there's so much to consider and so much to still happen. Talk to me a little bit about the AFL trade period. It goes, I think, first few weeks of October, you got free agency and trade period. It's probably longer than people want it to be, but I love it. I'm just one of those trade radio nerds. Every day I listen.
Me too.
But in terms of keeper, it doesn't surprise me. In terms of keeper leagues, why is it important to you when players change clubs? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, well, it's massive. It can have two impacts. Like it could potentially hurt a player, like one of your gun players, if another player comes in, or could be opportunity. So an example that I last year was Caleb Daniel, for example. I got him really cheap, hoping that he'd get a trade. He was a forward, and then he goes to a new club, and I've got him as a forward. He's obviously plays half back, average about 85 as a forward, very handsy, and I got him for absolute peanuts in a keeper. So it's important to see what the roles are. DPP is a big thing because someone might have had a bad role this year, but then they get a trade and they're in that position. They're going to play a new position, and it's massive. So that's why I love the trade period and dissecting that. And then if that player leaves, is that going to affect someone else? Another guy we talked about was Lockie Ash. Perryman left, played half back. There's guys like that. I always go, oh, well, is Ash going to be an uptick? And what did he do? He went nuts. So it's exciting,
and that Caleb Daniel one, that Caleb Daniel one's a perfect example. And I remember the night that trade went through, they interviewed the player agent. Yes. And I'm pretty sure he was like, he'll be playing off half back. And it's like, that guy knows that we're watching with fantasy in mind. But yeah, you're right. The change in role and opportunities for players, and then you even touched on the knock-on effect of that player's moved on. What does that mean? So it's really important to pay attention to the AFL trade period. Sure, you don't have to listen to trade radio all day like we do, but really take note of who's moved clubs and what the impact is, whether it's on them or for someone else. And then DPP changes is another big part of the off-season, and you mentioned it before. So the dual position players, we know the guys are super handy because they've got defender status as well as midfield, or forward as well as midfield. And then there's this exciting moment when Champion Data, I don't know who releases the lists, but we find out the new positions for the new season. And I love it every year because you look at your own squad, you're like, oh, yes, he's forward. Oh, he lost this. And anyway, it really impacts, the value of the players. And, for an example, I've got Horn Francis, who's one of my, stars in my home league. And I felt lucky that he held forward status the extra year. I enjoyed him this year, but next year he'll be mid only. So do I have the same confidence around him? I do. I actually think he'll become a very, very good midfielder. But what are some names that you think will lose? Well, that will lose, and does it impact their relevance?
Yeah, I think obviously the forward line is obviously the biggest talking point every year. This year we saw Baz go 116. Obviously he's going to be a mid only, but a few other names. Matt Kennedy, McRae, Chad Warner, Parker, Horn Francis, as you said. I'm expecting them all to be mid only, just with their CBAs this year. One thing I like to do is I go on player profiles for each team's website, and it usually gives a classification, and it's usually a pretty good indicator. So Chad Warner, for example, is listed as midfielder, but someone like Petrarca is midfielder forward. So he wasn't midfielder during the year. Oh, sorry, he wasn't forward during the year. He was just midfielder. And then he's obviously at the back end. He's got that back now, I think. So I'm expecting him to hold it. But the biggest one that I see is Harry Sheasel. Has at the moment the midfielder forward classification, which is just bananas because averaging 109, and he will pretty much just be the clear F1. I think the next best might be Nick Martin, who's injured, who had a great year, and he had, obviously has the ACL, which is so unfortunate, and maybe halfway through the year he'll come back in. But I think and he's for his age, I think he's going to be a clear, if it happens, I think he's going to be a clear pick one next year in Classic, in, your single season drafts, keepers, everything. It's massive.
And how, fortunate for Sheasel owners to have had all those years, the few years we've seen him as defender status, and now that's gone. That's all right. We'll pop him in the forward line. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I think, you got a bit of a combination there of DPP and the trade period. If you see someone like Christian Petrarca pick up forward status, which you've hinted he might or will, and then, he moves on to a Hawthorn who just play him as a 90% midfielder. And so that'd be your perfect mix there. But the DPPs, I love them. And I remember a few years ago, I had somehow in my home league, I had Gawn and Grundy, and Grundy was leaving Melbourne for Sydney. So it was the start of last year, I guess, and I was just hoping, please get forward status, because remember he shared with Gawn one year. And he went to Sydney, and I was like, oh, give me 1 year of him forward, because then I've got Gawn and Grundy, but he didn't get it. And,
even Gawn, I think, got close. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. No, it's good fun. And, again, something you really need to pay attention to, especially depending when your league delistings are, and this is the last bit we'll run through. So my two keeper leagues are, I think, pretty different to most in that we delist at the end of October. So we see the trade period, but we have to delist before the DPPs and the position changes are announced. And I like it that way personally, because it just means, if you're not paying attention, you lose someone who becomes more relevant, and then that just makes the draft more interesting. So 2 questions for you. One, how do the leagues you play in, or when do they do delistings? And then what's your process? How do you go about that final decision on cutting players?
Yep. So we do it before any preseason games. So I think it's first week of Feb. So before you get to see any preseason games, that way you can't see a role change in a preseason game and then change your mind. You sort of have to, I guess, you get some murmurings in January of training reports, but you don't get to actually see a game. So that's when we do it in my league. But how advanced, I've already sort of got a list. I've probably got a list about 15 at the moment, and I need to cut that down to 12 keepers. And, we have, as soon as the trade period's done, we open the trade period so you can still trade and trade picks and stuff. So there's obviously that as well. But yeah, and the thing is I know it's unfortunate, but sometimes a player might get injured in the preseason. So you might go, okay, he's injured. Maybe I'll delist him, and he might be one I can redraft later on and that can help a decision. Or like you said, someone moves clubs. Okay, that might impact him. You know what? I might just drop him and keep this player. And obviously age as well. I think a big one for me I've learned is, I think it was a Mitch Duncan. He was averaging 90 and he was a defender. And I thought, I'll just keep him because he should go 90 again. And I held him over a young kid. And, Duncan ended up averaging 75. And that kid ended up averaging 70 and being someone that you want to keep. So making those calls as well. And sort of what can hurt you. You don't want someone that can hurt you for 10 years, I guess. So I almost make the call of, say if Mitch Duncan does go 100, it's only going to be 1 or 2 years, not 10 years. Over a kid,
that's right. The regret will end long after he retires. Meanwhile, the other kid's still smashing it. I think the one thing I'd say, that the advice I'd give on that is be really aware of what the needs are of the other coaches in your league, the other squads. So, for example, if you're looking at delisting, you're down to 2 as a ruck versus a defender, and that your league is sweet for rucks. Everyone's got their main ruck. Everyone's pretty comfortable. It's almost about the likelihood of being able to get that guy back in the draft. So sometimes you might delist a player that's more of an unknown quantity and gamble on the fact that no one will pick up on his potential between now and the redraft, and then you back in your judgment and get him back, as opposed to dropping a bigger name like Well, yeah, I mean, like Harry Perryman stands out for me. I mean, you know, if he was so highly talked after with the trade, but looking back, you could easily have just dropped him. So, yeah, but there's a lot goes into it. Ours is different because it's earlier, and I like it that way. But I do know, actually, great advice on one of the preseason episodes where I had Kane from the coaches panel on. He was saying how because his league does it like yours, Geordie, delisting in January, February. At the end of the season, before it's all finished, he'd just sort of scoop up all these potential kids as free agents and just sit on them for the whole summer, and then see which one of them has a better summer and there's more hype around them, and then you just get rid of them and keep one or two. And he did that with Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera. When that pre-season, there was talk of him going to half back. So he's like, yep, well, I'll keep him, see how he goes. Try and get Kane back for another episode maybe later in the year to talk about the trade period or something like that. I'll ask him how he's going with Wanganeen-Milera, if he's glad he did that or not. So, yeah, look, there's just a few, and we could go on for hours, Geordie. I mean, there's so much in it, and every league's different, of course. But, they're the big sort of things you got to keep an eye on from here before the summer, because a keeper league, a keeper coach, you might get 1 or 2 weeks, take a breather, but it's a 12-month-a-year job, I reckon.
Yes,
now,
100%.
Before we do get to the very end, I just thought it'd be remiss of me not to do a Finders Keepers Player of the Year. Every week I've had a Player of the Week. There's no real criteria for this award. It's just someone that I think did well that weekend. But in terms of Player of the Year, I guess with the award, I'm generally trying to go to a younger player in the theme of it being a keeper league. But so special mentions: Bailey Smith, Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, both so young, 24, 22 respectively. Having them, you would just be so excited about the next 10 years. But for season 2025, I can't go past an older fella. And the Finders Keepers Player of the Year, for me, has to be Marcus Bontempelli. So he's 29 years old. We all know how great he is, and he's been doing it for a long time. Now, he missed the opening 5 games of the year and still went on to be the most reliable mid in the fantasy world. A 111 average made him the top averaging mid-only player in the game. And he went big at the pointy end of the year, the time of the year you want them firing. Averaged 123 in his last 10 games. And who could forget his performance in grand final week, the last round, where he put up a 141 and would have delivered many coaches a premiership on the back of that performance. And as someone who lost his grand final to someone who captained Bont, I can say absolutely, I wish I had him. So kudos to Bont and to the owners of Bont. What a wonderful year he had. Geordie, what do you reckon? Anyone better than Bont?
No, I think that's a good call. 111's insane. And I think Baz and Wanganeen-Milera, as you mentioned, like incredible years. I think all of those three are perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, it has been a big episode. Let's finish with a question. The final question of the year, sent in by @MitchFinn95 on X. And Geordie, he has written in saying, pick 2 players out of Trent Rivers, Zach Bailey, and Miles Bergman to keep. He then goes on to say, I've taken Houghton, Harvey Langford, and Jagger Smith on the rookie list to hopefully take the bottom 3 spots. And it's a 4-6-1-4 formation and a 9-keeper league. So those 3 kids, I mean, jeepers, that's pretty delicious. Houghton, Langford, and Jagger. Well played there. But Geordie, if you had to pick 2 to keep out of Rivers, Bailey, and Bergman, where would you land?
Yep. Well, my first mind goes to Bergman first. Like, I mean, obviously I might be a bit biased being a Port man, but I would 100% be keeping Bergman. He's just the one that stands out there. I think he can play midfield. Defender status, you got to keep him. So then it comes down to Rivers and Bailey, and we saw Bailey have a really good year this year. Went to 84 average. He's a forward. So that there is that forward status which we are in need of. And then you've got Rivers, who will have defender status. But I think I'm leaning towards Bailey because of the defender status. I do think, though, Rivers does have the scope to potentially be a 90-plus guy. It's just be interesting to see what the new coach does. I think the forward status is going to take me on that one. So I think I'm going Bailey and Bergman.
Yeah, I reckon
it's
this
hard,
is
though.
really hard. It's a great question. It's a good position to be in if you're Mitch. I probably land on the same, and I've got Rivers, and I've been a big fan of his, but it's been frustrating owning him. Just that promise of midfield time, and it just didn't really happen this year. Bailey, I don't know. He's so interesting. He's had this great year. Is this his ceiling? Is he going to do this for a few more years in the 80s, or does he drop back down? Bloody tight between him and Rivers, and I'm with you. Bergman's probably the easy hold there, because the other thing with Bergman is he's got a 2-year deal, I think, to stay at Port. If he doesn't, I'm not suggesting this is the case, but if he does want to be a midfielder and he doesn't get that in the next 2 years to his liking, he'll come home to a Victorian club and be a midfielder there. So looking long term, Bergman definitely for me, and then splitting Rivers and Bailey, I reckon I'll probably just land on Bailey, just same as you, Geordie. Just that forward status.
It's hard,
and just guys that are who's more likely to be redrafted. I reckon, unless there's a heap of hype around Rivers, which there may be, I reckon you could get him back if you are willing to give up an early-ish pick. Great question, Mitch. I think it's a fine way to finish the season and the pod. Thanks for sending that through. And with that, we are done for season 2025, the first season of Finders Keepers. And I've really enjoyed this podcast, putting it together every week. I've enjoyed the feedback that I've got. And Geordie, thanks so much for jumping on. This has been a big episode to finish, and I've loved working with you on the Fanatics and get to know you the last year, mate. So I think it's quite fitting you join me for my last episode for the season. Thank you very much. Let the people know where they can find you, and tell us a bit about what's happening with your music, because I believe you might have a new song possibly out soon.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me on. I agree. It's been an awesome year, and good to meet you as well in person at Gather Round, which was an awesome night too. You can just Jordan DeSena on X, have a little bit of a break, and then, I live sort of close to Alberton. So I think last year I will definitely get down to training and see if I can see some role changes there. The off season I will be doing a lot of gigs, and I do have a new song that I need to release, get a video sorted, a few little bits and pieces. So that'll be coming out soon.
Sounds good. And, whenever you have someone on and you spruik their work, I'm telling you, I've been listening to your music on Spotify, and go and listen to it. Jordan DeSena on Spotify. Really, really good stuff, mate. Can't wait to hear the new one. And, thanks again for joining me. I'm sure we'll see more of you on Finders Keepers next year. And, that's probably it. Last thing, I guess, would be just to thank you, the listener. I talked about this last week, but, it's been really good putting this together, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm going to spend the summer working on it to make it even better for 2026. I will be back before then. There'll be plenty to talk about. The trade period that's coming in October, position changes, the national draft. There's so much that happens, and that's why we love Keeper Leagues. So thank you for tuning in this season. Go and find Finders Keepers on X at FindKeepAFL to stay up to date with the podcast in the off season. And I think that's probably it. thank you very much. We'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, for the last time this season, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.